I'm Anna, and I'm here to tell you that you're listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix.
Welcome to Delivering on Climate Change, our collective challenge. Welcome to the Decarbonisation Dialogue. I am Hannah Walker, and I believe that the best way to communicate a message is by being passionate about what you are talking about. Through that passion, I believe you take people with you and create action using your influence to make change and make a difference. Our task today is to get all of us to net zero. My guest today is Jess Hines. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Jess. Jess's job is to spark change through compelling storytelling. She's a passionate film, TV and climate campaigning specialist. Jess is co-founder of Fingerprint Content, working with creative teams around the world to create popular content for a variety of audiences. Fingerprint Content was created with a clear and urgent mission to spark change in the way we portray social issues on the screen. Every day, Jess works to empower the world's most exciting storytellers to bring their deeply held passions to life, exploring inequality, race and gender, and the power of big business, and most particularly and recently, climate change. And by doing this, Jess believes this brings bigger focus to these issues, driving engagement and thought-provoking content. With more than 2 decades of experience across the UK, US and Indian film industries, she has helped shape globally recognised titles and collaborated with some of the most influential cultural figures of our time. At Fingerprint, she works alongside US John Kerry, who is, of course, President Obama's Secretary of State and later served as President Biden's Special Envoy for Climate. Fingerprint has also worked with Pulitzer Prize winner Barbara Kingsolver, a female-led heightened genre feature set in Corfu, and an eco-crime thriller written by Piyush Gupta, and an ambitious anthology series on architecture denialism. Jess is also writer of a best-selling book on Bollywood, politics, action and entertainment. And I just can't wait because there's just, I've done quite a bit of research about Jess. I know one of her mottos is creating the most change in the least time. Jess is obviously exceptionally busy, having read that CV. So thank you very much to Jess for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Jess, tell us a little bit about your career and how you got so interested in telling stories. I know you grew up in Cornwall and you have a big connection to the natural world, but tell us a little bit about where your passion for storytelling comes from, because that's where it all starts. And how do you start telling a story? And is it always about getting to the truth?
That's about 4 questions, so I'm going to pick them off one by one. Don't think I've ever described what I've done in my life as a career or a series of happy accidents. I did grow up in Cornwall. I grew up in Cornwall in the 70s and 80s, which is a very different place than it is now. It was not in any way bougie like it is now, and but I was blessed to grow up with a community of people around me that were also slightly misfits. My parents were not fishermen or farmers; they were all creative, so that was a blessing. I think storytelling came to me with my father, who is a poet, and he plays a lot of slide guitar now. He's in his 80s and he has his little band. And he used to tell me bedtime stories every night about the fairies that lived at the bottom of the garden, which were called, and the princess that lived there too, and they were called Tintina, Alexander and the princess. And so every night these stories would evolve, and that was, I think, the most kind of magical way to be introduced to the power of storytelling. Yeah, and I've forgotten what the other 2 questions were. Is
the idea of your storytelling, I mean, obviously the Cornish landscape has played a big part, and I would imagine there's a bit of a sense of isolation because I think you were surrounded by not a lot in terms of country. So you were creating stories, I think, and then and having that connection to the natural world. But I wondered, is it always about getting to the truth in terms of your stories? I mean, you've talked about those kind of stories, but you're telling very different stories now.
I think it's getting to the emotional truth. I think that there is the truth that people take out take away from stories is their own. That the idea of an objective truth, one objective truth, is of course a tricky one. There's big objective truths like we are warming the planet exponentially and everything is going to is changing. We are in the middle of it. It is, the grass outside my flat is yellow in June, whereas it used to be, every now and again yellow in August, and everyone used to go, but now, the things have changed already, and that change is only going to accelerate. So there are big truths. The joy of allowing people to find their own way to these stories is by people finding their own emotional and truth that resonates with who they are. That's the real power of storytelling, rather than there being like, a kind of polemic, you must do this. It is about how do you take yourself to the next phase of wherever it is that you are on your journey.
Mm-hmm. When you're planning your climate projects, we'll talk about the climate change now, but when you're planning your climate projects, how do you set out to inspire positive action on climate? Because it is easy to be all doom and gloom, particularly when we're looking at the news. How do you make it positive, and how do you inspire action? Because I know that's a big drive of yours, to inspire action.
It's about who the audience is. So there's not like one perfect story. And I think that people who are in the climate space are really good at being mean at climate stories. Everyone hates on Don't Look Up or whatever it is that they want to hate on. It's, it's either too popular, it's not popular enough. It's like, we have to do it, all of it. I'm a big believer in, obviously working in India, in Bollywood for a lot of my life. I'm very lowbrow and very popular. And I think if you start with the audience and figure out who it is that you're trying to speak to at that point in time with that story, then you will know what actions that people can take there. When I say things like we need to be able to do all of it, it's because there's no one story that's going to be the perfect story. And we have to learn things several times. Like actually, if you're thinking about a behavior change type of scenario, you need to get one message said in different ways several times before you actually make that change yourself. So in terms of like how these things work, what I do is only part of the whole. People always like to look at sort of marriage equality and say things like, well, will and grace, what we need is will and grace for climate. It's like, that's not going to happen. That was like appointment viewing. It was deeply popular. It was deeply vanilla. And it was, to reach as many people as possible. But everyone would watch it on a Thursday night and talk about it on Friday. We're not in that space anymore. So how do you just be part of the layering and just be clear of where your part of the layering is going to go, who it's going to reach, and what it is that that they can do? If you're preaching to the choir, that's great. If the choir's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, a lot of people who know this stuff are not doing all they can do because it's a lot. And getting through the day is hard, and getting through the week is hard, and trying to make ends meet is hard. And still they pollute, and still the people that, that are setting up, and as we all know, creating, 90% of the emissions are coming from 10 companies or 100 companies in the world. I mean, it's insane. Not letting them off the hook by people sort of being aware of what the actual reality is on the ground is also part of the need to take action.
What is the connection with you and India?
It's the biography of a man called Amitabh Bachchan, who is the biggest movie star in the world. He's now in his 80s and is still a fabulous friend. I basically went to India when I was 18. I did a very 18-year-old thing and went and worked in the villages in Rajasthan with the Social Work and Research Centre in Talonia. I was digging wells and doing drama workshops with women's groups, and realised very quickly that I had zero to teach anyone, just like what the hell was I doing? However, it was extraordinary. Then I went and did a whole bunch of other things. But when I went back to university and I was studying comparative religion at SOAS, and I went to university late, because I'd been in Toronto learning how to clown, I sort of discovered a new course that was run by Professor Rachel Dwyer called Cinema and Society in India. And it was like everything that I'd been doing in physical theatre and clowning. And I'd seen one film in India when I'd been there, which was Maina Pyakya, which was one of the big kind of new 90s, early 90s, like love stories, romance for romance sake, rather than this kind of angry young man stuff that Amitabh Bachchan was the lead hero of. And so I kind of sort of found my creative storytelling space stories should be circular, and there's absolutely no reason why you can't look in someone's eyes and end up in Switzerland. So yeah, no, I believe in sort of the verbosity of all of that very strongly. It's how I am.
The work that you're now doing on climate change, I know you're doing it, there are a lot of projects on the go, but on climate change, that often impacts those, and we've alluded to it, but who can afford it least across the world. How does your work on inequality and gender overlap with your climate projects?
Yeah, I always say that climate change has several really miserable intersectional friends. It's like sort of, the four horsemen of the apocalypse plus. I think that if you're doing anything around storytelling and climate, the ways in are often through the points of inequality. So the different stories that we have on the go at the moment, one that I talked about, which is written by James Graham, one of Britain's most extraordinary playwrights and script writers. We're doing that with Left Bank, and that is about the sort of the world of doubt and denial that we live in today, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure your listeners are probably aware, was created by basically three men, two of whom were called Fred, and who took the tobacco playbook, and that has been spun out over and over. So it's about that world, but the characters within that world are from different walks of life, and the inequality of the polluters versus those who are impacted by it, and then are often exploited by deniers to act very much against their own interests is kind of where the tension and the drama for that one lies. So it is a bit sort of, it's often a very good way to come into the story, because the people who are creating all of the pollution and who believe in accelerationist kind of ideas around this terminal stage capitalism that we're in is, they've all got their bunkers lined up, so not really caring about them so much.
Yeah. And the influences you've mentioned, Bachan and then obviously Graham. Who are the big? Are there any other people who have influenced your journey and your career, and how has that shaped your views and your work in terms of people?
I'm famously annoying for constantly quoting Ursula Le Guin at sort of any given moment for anything, because she's queen. And I think that I was asked recently, actually, what was a good sort of climate novel. Obviously, there's the from Margaret Atwood Mad Adam trilogy is extraordinary, and she's also queen. But we can have many. Always Coming Home, which Ursula Le Guin wrote about it's like an anthropology text about a people who may be going to have lived, which is a sort of exquisitely structured sentence, as all her sentences are. She is someone who has never been afraid to use whatever genre was necessary to be able to tell the story and the point that she wanted to make. And that kind of joy of not being bound to reality, because mankind is hard for mankind cannot bear too much reality, to misquote T.S. Eliot, is a way for people to deal with the huge emotions that these things trigger without getting bogged down in sort of how depressing it can often feel. I couldn't
quite believe this when I read this, but how did you manage to persuade John Kerry to join your team? Because when I think of John Kerry, I think of Obama, I think of obviously Biden. How did that happen? Because he's been obviously talking about climate for decades. People think about John Kerry. How are you finding that working relationship, and what is his involvement?
We launched in March of 2020 because nothing else is going on in March 2020. It was a really great time to launch a British company. We literally launched and then shut down everything 3 days later. But John is an exceptional communicator, and when you listen to him speak, you understand the concept of an orator, which I'd never really understood before, that some people can do a good speech and some people are orators, and he is old school, and it's fab to be able to hear that. He is also someone who understands the power of storytelling, like all politicians do, but he's obviously had it for good and for evil. He understands what is needed for the work that he does with the different leaders and the sort of grass tops, as it were, as people call it, is that actually you need to be able to shift things at a societal level for that kind of work to have any kind of attempt at purchase, because politicians are not going to give up political capital on something which is not popular and not going to get them re-elected. Politicians are terrified of their electorate, brands are terrified of their consumers, and filmmakers are terrified of their audiences. So if you have the society changing, then you have a mandate for those politicians to be able to do the hard work that's needed and to make those tough calls and to do the big sort of pieces of legislation and law that we need to enact. So he gets all that.
You're talking about the appetite for change and the role of politicians, but what do you think, moving back to the climate issues, what is your view of the public's appetite for the key lifestyle changes that we now need to achieve our long-term climate change, commitments and environmental goals?
One of the genius things that the status quo has done to date, and I think probably if you look back, status quo, this is what status quos do, is that they position where we're at now is the only way that life and the planet and society can operate. Because actually it's very young, the sort of crazy form of capitalism that we're all sort of caught up in. It's only sort of a couple of 100 years old. So the idea that this is the only way we can live happily is not correct, but it is so entrenched in all of us. It's entrenched in me, and this idea that actually we could shift things and change and be as happy, if not happier, in a different societal setup is really hard to get your head around. Honestly, the only way to do that is to tell stories that show how things could be, now but not now, or something like that, so that people can, because as humans, everything we do comes from stories, but we have to tell those stories in our head before we can get there. I mean, like from racism to rockets, it's all comes from stories that we tell ourselves and are told to us. And I think that is where the real power lies, is that it is always the small stories. It's the quiet quilting of our lives. It is the little love stories that we tell each other, and not, the big tentpole pieces, which obviously I'm trying to be part of, and engineer is very important, because it gives a kind of way, sort of a structure and a way for people to be able to allow themselves to go. But it's, you and I talking, or you talking to someone, we all have an audience, we all have people we talk to, and those stories and those kind of shifts, those sort of gentle shifts, are what absolutely, takes apart empires and changes religions and topples tyrants. There's nothing else.
The art of storytelling is it's something we've been doing for centuries and centuries. Indeed, I love a story that my own father told me, and he still tells this story as an artist. He was traveling in Australia in the outback in the early 80s. And he was with a group of Aboriginal people, they didn't consider themselves as artists, but they were storytellers, artists. And he tells a story about one night, they said they were going to go out and talk to the spirits and tell stories. So they got their wood and paste and what they were going to do to create what I think my father thought was going to be great art. They sat throughout the night creating these wonderful, wonderful paintings on wood. And at the end of the evening, my father had to sit away. He wasn't involved. He had to sit back. Much to his absolute confusion, at the end of the night, they said, now we're going to leave. And they burnt the pieces they had created because the stories and the spirits had gone. And these were not objects to be kept, and as people might do today. So the stories are there, they are live, they are passed on through the generations, aren't they? It is something that we do and have done. And that is absolutely what fascinates me about your work, because you are adamantly always going back to that magic, because it has to stem from that magic, doesn't it? From that storytelling.
Yeah. And I think that there's something that's a fabulous story about your dad and sort of the different ways of telling stories and also relating to the world that we are in. And I think that I just read something recently about Western literature will write about the landscape. So it will write about trees, or write about a river, or write about the field that they kiss in Room with a View, or sort of, one of those things that sort of, and that sort of transports you with different indigenous storytelling and so therefore ways of relating, you are talking with the land and with the spirits or the aliveness of these different things, whether it be a wood or a river or a grassland. I think that that's something that we're not taught about, but I think that you sort of get that sort of feeling of a presence when you're in a landscape. Not just in a beautiful landscape, but if you're in an urban landscape, which is really sort of excessively walked on or whatever. Like, I don't know. I always find like Tottenham Court Road, Charing Cross Road and Oxford Street intersection really heavy. Like, there's a real heaviness there. And then I sort of found out about the rookeries being there. So I just feel like there's like, there is certain sort of energies in different points of land, and we feel it, but we don't know how to talk about it. And Amitav Ghosh is obviously one of the kind of great inspirational people who write about storytelling and climate. It talks about this feeling of the uncanny and how do we capture that sense of things to be able to allow us to to restructure how we sit within the natural world of which we're a part of.
I could talk to you for absolutely all day, and which obviously you don't want to because you've got to get on and we've all got to move on. But can I ask, so obviously highly successful, a real entrepreneur, and you've just produced, you just get on and do it. But what next, Jess, for you and your career?
We lost one of our founding partners in February, and it's been a huge blow. The loss of Melanie Dix, who was my partner and very close friend, has been sort of she comes from a footballing background, and we have those star players that you can't actually replace. You have to get sort of 3 players to replace them. So we are in the middle of restructuring and rethinking how we operate at Fingerprint so that we can sort of deliver on the legacy that she has created. We're developing a whole series of partnerships with different organisations to allow us to ramp up the sort of the area where the funding is needed, which is that kind of development area, and allowing be sort of like a mixed finance model coming in there. So that's really exciting. Obviously, all the projects we're doing are in different stages of development or post-production. So that's all of that's going on. I'm actually also in the middle of doing a master's at UEA because I wanted to have an ability just to write without having to think about who was going to buy it or pay for it or where the audience was going to be and where it's going to distribute, all that stuff. So I'm enjoying that. And that seems to be bringing out actually more of the magic side of things. So let's see where that goes. But yeah.
Fantastic. And more of that magic, because I picked up a quote that you have said, but you will correct me. You said, there is magic around us that is touching us all of the time. We just have to let ourselves feel it. And I think that's just wonderful, because it is magic, and it's been magical speaking to you, Jess. Thank you very much to Jess Hines for speaking with me today and providing such insight. There can be no doubt that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. Today, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow global warming. Today, we must act for tomorrow, adjusting our lifestyles to current and future impacts of climate change. Today, we must use our collective wisdom to deliver on our climate commitments. Today, we work for tomorrow's world. Thank you once again to Jess Hines for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
It's been lovely to speak to you and a great way to start the day.
I'm Michael, and I'm here to tell you that you've been listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix. For more information about our work and to find more content, please visit salixfinance.co.uk/podcasts.